like to introduce our guests this evening for the sponsored portion of our program. We have Senator Jerry Klein. He's a Republican from Fessenden. He is the chairman of the Senate Industry, Business, and Labor Committee. We have Leann Holzer, who is a mortgage loan officer for the Capital Credit Union of Bismarck. We also have Mr. Dave Campbell, who is a property appraiser in North Dakota, and we're going to be talking about credit union issues, specifically how difficult it is to get an appraisal, and more essentially we have a situation where federal regulations, new regulations, have made getting a loan for a home mortgage a bit more difficult and time consuming, and we're going to be talking about that. First of all, Senator Klein, I wanted to just ask you, are there particular issues in your Industry, Business, and Labor Committee, of which you're the chairman, that affect financial services or that you think are particularly notable in the financial services realm?
Well, Dale, we probably didn't have any big BAMs or big BABs, which would be a big bills.
Big burgers or big bills?
And, the fact that we've gotten to a position where everybody seems to be working together well, there hasn't been a lot of issues that's come before our committee that have dealt with, in particular, the credit unions or even the banks for that matter. It seems that we have we're in a period of time. I've been here a few sessions now that everyone is just getting along, and it's just great. So as far as the concerns to the financial institution, I don't think we're seeing them, but I know there's been a lot of discussion. You're gonna take that up, and we've heard that all during the interim in the Administrative Rules Committee as it relates to appraisers, and I think you're going to touch on that. What
are you talking about when you talk about administrative rules and appraisers?
Well, as you know, there's a lot of issues in Western North Dakota with getting adequate appraisals, and because of the fact that any loan that deals or has any federal dollars in it needs a federally authorized appraiser. We lack appraisers in North Dakota, and we were making every attempt, and God bless Senator Andrus for working so hard, because from coming from Crosby and the trouble that they've had in that area, trying to get a licensed professional appraiser to come and do a licensed appraisal has been very difficult. And we've been making every attempt to see if we can circumvent that system, only to come to find that the federal government supersedes all that, and that our appraisers in North Dakota have to follow the federal guidelines, be trained as the federal guidelines dictate anytime there's any loan that has anything to do with any federal dollars. So that puts appraisers a bit at a disadvantage, trying to what I would say circumvent the system and get more of those folks out there doing the job.
Ms. Holzer, could you just explain to us, please, what is the role of an appraiser in the process of getting a home mortgage loan?
Dale, what the appraiser does is his function is to determine a value for the property that we are financing based on other sales within that same area. It's an opinion that they work through, looking at the comps, so that we know that the dollars that we are financing the property is worth what we're going to be borrowing out.
And why is it necessary to have a good appraisal when you're making a mortgage loan? What is the function of the appraisal?
We need to know that the collateral that we are taking is worth what we're borrowing.
So the appraiser gives you a good indication of what the property is worth, and then you know how much to loan. Absolutely.
Based on current market, he will make a determination as to what the value is.
And is there any particular difficulty in the last couple of years getting a timely appraisal?
The difficulties that we're running into is in our metropolitan area in Bismarck here, we are so busy right here that it's very difficult for our appraisers to travel to the outlying areas because there is so much work right here. And when they have to travel to outlying areas, they're taking up valuable time doing 1 or 2 appraisals where they could be right here doing 5 or 6 appraisals in a day. And that's the problem that we run into. We have a huge problem getting appraisers to even go to the outlying areas for us. Even locally, we've seen up to 12 weeks for an appraisal.
Could you talk about the increase in mortgage loan demand in the Bismarck-Mandan area that you serve?
We've seen our demand this past year, just in our institution alone, has doubled. And they're predicting an influx of 40,000 people in the next 5 years in our state. That would equate to about 5,000 housing units right here in Bismarck per year. So the problem is only going to escalate as far as getting timely appraisals and getting people into their homes. And as you know, in the western part of the state, that's very critical, especially with our weather, that we do get people into their homes.
How long did it take, say, for example, 5 years ago, to get a timely appraisal as part of a mortgage loan, and how long does it take now?
5 years ago, I could get an appraisal in no more than 2 weeks. Now I'm waiting as long as 3 months. If I can get it in 8 weeks, I'm doing very well.
Do you know if this is common in other growing areas of North Dakota, this sort of delay?
From our standpoint here from Bismarck West, it's very common. I know in some of the areas like Stanley, Tioga, some of those people are waiting almost 12 months to get an appraisal.
Mr. Campbell, could you explain to us the role of the appraiser in getting a mortgage loan and what an appraiser does?
Well, the appraiser obtains sales of other properties in the same community or in the same neighborhood, if possible, that would be similar to the property that you're appraising. And then they will look at the different sales and compare them to the subject property, making adjustments for differences, and then arriving at a value estimate.
And how long a process is this?
Well, the appraisal process itself would probably take, I know you mentioned 5 or 6 a day. I think that's probably a little bit aggressive. I think most appraisers are probably figuring, because the requirements have gone up more and more, there's more and more required for an appraisal now than there used to be, say, 5-10 years ago. But I would say you're probably looking at 1 to maybe 3 appraisals per day if you're staying in a local market like Bismarck. But like was mentioned before, if you end up having to go to a smaller community where there isn't the data available, it just takes a lot of time, and you can be lucky to get 1 appraisal done in a day.
And could you elaborate a bit more as to why an appraisal in a rural area takes longer for you to finish?
Well, because sales in, say, Bismarck or Minot or even Williston-Dickinson, there's a multiple listing service available that appraisers subscribe to and keep track of all the sales that are going on. If you go to a smaller community, say a Tioga or a Crosby or something like that, there's no such animal out there. And a lot of the sales that do take place are not actually, the prices are not actually disclosed on the deeds. In North Dakota, we have a law that allows full disclosure, or allows that they can certify to the state tax folks, but that information is not available to the appraiser without a lot of work. Sometimes you can go through a confirmation process, verification process, and call the buyer or the seller and get that information. Sometimes you won't get it because they just feel it's confidential, it's none of your business. That just means you have to work all that much harder to find the sales, to verify the sales that you can use. And of course, there aren't as many sales transactions going on.
What could the legislature do, sir, to make it easier for more faster and perhaps more accurate appraisals be done in rural areas?
Well, I think there is some legislation. It's nothing that we've introduced as far as the appraisal board goes, but there is some legislation that's going through the process now whereby some of this information that was previously provided only to the assessing folks would be available to certified and licensed appraisers. We've tried doing that twice before in past legislative sessions, and we've always run into the roadblock of, no, that's really confidential information, it's really none of your business. And we tried it the first time, and we didn't get very far at all. The realtors opposed us, and the second time the realtors were on board with us, but then they wanted to be included as well. So, but having that information available would be, I know like the folks in Williston, for example, I've talked to some of those folks, and they say they don't really want to go to Crosby because they're just so difficult to find comparable sales to use.
How many appraisers are there in North Dakota, sir?
We have about 300 total, and we have 4 different levels of appraisers. Certified general appraiser can do pretty much any kind of property type. They can do agricultural land, they can do commercial property, they can do residential property. We've got about 147 of those folks in the state. Certified residential, those folks generally focus more on residential properties, but they're a higher level of residential appraiser in terms of the education and experience required to get to that level of permit. And there are about 61 of those folks in the state. And then the licensed appraiser, which is originally we started off with just 2 levels of appraisers in our state, the certified general and the licensed. FHA has now required that all of their appraisals be done by a certified residential appraiser. When that was being discussed, our board, the appraisal board, actually wrote a letter to FHA saying, don't do that to us because all we have is the 2 levels in North Dakota. We have the certified general and the licensed. And we were just starting to get into the certified residential category. And so we didn't have enough licensed appraisers to meet that demand that we knew would be coming. But unfortunately, they went ahead and did it anyway. So right now we've got about 38 folks that are still remaining as licensed appraisers, and we have 47 apprentice appraisers. That's appraisers in training. Now, North Dakota is one of a few states that is actually a voluntary state. Anyone at this table could do an appraisal in the state and not be in violation of the state appraiser law, but you wouldn't get the credit unions or the banks to hire those folks more than likely. And then there's also a level of what they call de minimis, where if the transaction value, which is also defined as loan value, is less than $250,000, they don't have to have the services of a licensed or certified appraiser in those instances.
Sir, what sort of training is needed to become an appraiser? If I, for example, decided that I wanted to become an appraiser, it sounded like a good business to be in, what would I need to do?
Okay, the requirements that we have to follow are federal requirements. When this law was set up back in 1989, it was kind of an unusual law in that it was 3 stools, or 3-step feet to the stool of enforcement. The first one was the appraisal subcommittee. That was comprised of regulators like the credit union and the FDIC and those folks, OCC. That appraisal subcommittee had oversight responsibility over the appraisers and also over the next leg of the stool, which is the appraisal foundation. The appraisal foundation was comprised primarily of 2 boards at that time, and one was to set the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice, which all appraisers are required to follow. That's the minimum standards of professional appraisal practice. And then the other board was the appraiser qualifications board. And those are the folks that set the minimum requirements for the different levels, the certified residential level and the certified general level. At that time, they didn't set the license level, but they recommended a license level minimum. And when we were writing the bill back in 1989, we had a coalition of folks put together. The bankers were included, the realtors, I don't remember if the home builders were involved, but a group of folks that helped write that law. And we agreed we would write the law so as to meet the minimums of the federal requirements, and that's what it was written. Later on, we asked the appraisers if they wanted to have this other level of certified residential, knowing that it was the next level of experience that was required. And the first time we sent that out, there was really not a lot of demand. The second time was still a low demand for that, but we decided to implement it anyway. And thankfully we did, because it was shortly after that that FHA made the determination that they're going to use certified residential appraisal.
So how long does it take to get an appraiser's license?
It varies. Like the license level.
What's the minimum?
Is it 2,000 hours, Joe? What are the minimum requirements for licensing?
It's okay. It's okay. If you don't know, that's fine.
Well, Dale, I think what we found in listening to the appraisers and they're making a lot of attempts to get a lot more appraisers out. But what we didn't talk about is that you have to apprentice. And to apprentice, you have to work under an appraiser. And certainly up until this point, we probably didn't need as many appraisers. But now, a lot of those folks didn't want to have some apprentice that was going to learn the job and then maybe, and I'm only listening as we listen to testimony, horn in on what we have built up as a business. There's a lot of appraisers here in Bismarck that worked really hard, always bringing in apprentices, always training new people, because Dave, as you can tell, is getting a little grayer, as we all are, and they're losing some of those folks, and they need to get some of these guys trained. But it's the big problem was developing that apprentice program and getting those guys to that level so they could do the big ones.
We've been speaking this evening to Senator Jerry Klein, who is the chairman of the Senate Industry, Business, and Labor Committee. His committee has jurisdiction over financial matters in the North Dakota Senate. We've also been speaking to Mr. Dave Campbell, an appraiser from Bismarck, and Leann Holzer, who is a mortgage loan processor at Capital Credit Union in Bismarck. And we've been talking about the difficulties of a shortage of appraisers and what that poses for folks who are trying to get a home mortgage loan. We may be able to return to this subject in our second half hour, but in any case, this is the Legislature Today radio show. We're broadcasting from the Peacock Alley in Bismarck, North Dakota. My name's Dale Wetzel. I am the host of the program, and we will be back with you shortly. Good evening. My name is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host of the Legislature Today radio show. We're broadcasting from the Peacock Alley in downtown Bismarck, North Dakota. And we're going to be speaking in the next half hour about a program that, a legislation in the North Dakota Legislature that would offer micro loans to entrepreneurs in North Dakota. And microloans, we're talking about very small amounts of money lent to folks who will use it, it is hoped, to begin businesses, hire employees, and contribute to the general economic prosperity of North Dakota. We have as our guests Mr. Robbie Thompson, who is the president and CEO of the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas. We have Fargo Senator Tim Mathern. He is a Democrat from Fargo. He's a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee. And we have Mr. Jeff Nelson, who is a vice president for advocacy for the Credit Union Association of North Dakota. First of all, Senator Mathern, could you tell us about the bill that I just made a very slight reference to that will offer micro loans, money for micro loans to folks who can use those loans to start businesses?
Yeah, glad to, Dale. Senate Bill 2349 came to us from Fauzi Adi, who is the executive director of the Immigrant Development Center, who is from Fargo. Fauzi and that organization works with new Americans. And many of these new Americans, people coming from other countries to this country, have skills. And those skills can be put to immediate use by their own business development. But often what they need is a small loan. And this concept of microloan has actually been around the country for 20 years or so. And what happens is this small loan develops into economic activity, develops into business development, develops into these new Americans paying taxes, these new Americans paying for all of the expenses that they had coming to America. In fact, these new Americans probably add more to the economy than you or I, Dale. We ought to hear from this woman directly.
Certainly, I'm sure that they contribute more to the economy than I ever did. Ms. Fauzi, I'm sorry to be so informal, ma'am, but are you there?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry, I can't.
I'm on the. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't. Is she on the phone?
Yes,
Okay.
I am.
Oh,
Yes.
I think I hear her.
I don't.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Sounds like she's calling all the way from Fargo.
Oh my goodness. we use tin cans attached by. Well, I'm sorry. We can't appear to hear
You know,
her.
Fauzia is originally from Africa.
We're in Africa, Senator Mather.
I'm not exactly sure which country, but she has a number of children. She raises children, runs this organization called Immigrant Developmental Center, and now came to the North Dakota Legislature to get us to put in a few dollars to start this microloan program.
How much money are we talking about here, sir?
You know, she asked that we appropriate $200,000 to the Department of Commerce, and that money would be used to make a grant to an organization like hers, and they would re-grant that to individual entrepreneurs to start businesses. Some of this has been going on, for example, in India. Poor communities, we found out that you could buy a woman a sewing machine. Might cost $50 or $60 for that sewing machine, and eventually she could support her family. We did this in South America, and what has been learned in the process is people actually want to work, people want to support themselves and their family, and I think it'd be great if we did something where credit unions in this state could be involved in this program. Credit unions already know about making loans. If we could some way take this $200,000 and provide a vehicle to back up these loans, maybe we could get credit unions all over the state to do this business.
Mr. Olson, I understand that you testified on this bill today. What could you tell us about what it does?
Well, we know that the microloan program, it really works, as Senator Mather talked about. And microloans is something the credit unions have been doing for a long time. I mean, the very idea of granting very small microloans to people of modest means is a concept that's really associated with the credit union movement. Now, we make these loans every day, and we know that these microloans have been going on since the early 70s globally, and they really work in some of these third world countries where, you know, the dollar is very, very precious. I'll give you a story. One of our CEOs from one of our members in the Dakotas, his daughter recently was in the Peace Corps, and she was assigned to Mali. And she was working with the constituents of Mali. She came across a gentleman that needed a wheelbarrow. He had his own business, but he could do twice the work if he had a wheelbarrow. And so she was writing home or calling home to her parents, and her dad said, well, you know, you should contact the World Credit Union Council. They do these loans programs globally, and these microloan programs, and maybe you can help. And so with his help, they did this, and this man got a $50 loan for a wheelbarrow. Now, that's a pretty expensive wheelbarrow. You could probably pick one up locally here at the box store for half that, but that wheelbarrow made the difference in that man's life, and he was able to do twice the work with just that little wheelbarrow, paid that loan back, and was able to help his own local economy out.
And just so that we've used the term microloan, and you just mentioned the figure $25 or $50. When we talk about microloans, how much money are we talking about?
Well, they vary. It really depends on these lenders. The average microloan in the country is $13,000, and they're generally less than $50. Some of them are for startup business purposes. Some are to help people get the right kind of education. But most of them they're entrepreneurial type programs to help them get their business started, to help them with the necessary capital and so forth.
Mr. Thompson, to what extent are microloans a part of the business of credit unions in North and South Dakota?
It's a pretty significant part. I hear stories from credit unions all the time when I go out there that talk not just from a business standpoint, but from a individual standpoint. We give lots of $100 and $200 and $300 loans at very reasonable interest rates, not the kind of interest rates you would see from a payday lender type of relationship. We're restricted on what we can charge in our interest rates, and we try to do it right. Lots of times it's because we have a relationship. As credit unions, they've been members for years. Their family's been members, so we're able to make those loans based in part on the relationship. I think one of the things that we have problems with some micro loans or some really small loans is that we still have regulations we have to follow in terms of how we can whether we can give somebody the loan or not, because we have to take a risk there if that's the case. And so if there's no credit history or there's no credit score, it's a bad credit score, they don't have work history, things like that, it makes it really difficult for us to give loans. Which is why I encourage Senator Mather and the legislature to look at maybe an alternative program where credit unions could actually get a guarantee on these funds. They would be more willing and more able to give more of the loans with a guarantee because there'd be some backing behind that.
Is collateral a problem here? I mean, I'm trying to think of Mr. Olson. You mentioned a loan for a wheelbarrow. I mean, it would be interesting to get a loan from your bank or credit union for a wheelbarrow and have the wheelbarrow as collateral. I imagine that'd be a fairly unusual loan.
Yeah, that would be pretty unusual.
Is collateral, the availability of collateral for a loan, part of the issue here?
Well, I think on a real micro loan, if you're looking at a $10,000 loan on maybe a used pickup truck or something to do some work, it's going to be really tough to be able to use that as collateral because it's probably going to depreciate very quickly if it's used quite a bit, and there's not a lot of collateral there. So then part of that loan is treated as an unsecured loan, which we have to put into a different risk bucket for our credit unions, and then it's treated differently by our examiners, which again why we would be more willing to do that if there was some backing behind it and some way that we could do that. We want to give loans to people. That's the lifeblood. We're people helping people. That's our philosophy as credit unions. We want to give small dollar loans. We want to help people give loans. We want to help small businesses get started out. We're Main Street, not Wall Street, and that's what we do.
And so would this bill that Senator Mathern has been discussing, would it offer essentially, is it a loan guarantee fund for microloans, or would it be making microloans directly?
Well, this bill actually would be providing money to the Department of Commerce. They would borrow that money or grant it to this center that works with New Americans.
I see.
And they would do the loans. But I think it's kind of interesting sitting around the table tonight. It kind of gives some appreciation for the legislative process. A bill like this comes to a committee. And so this is Fauzia's idea. She comes to me with this idea. We get this bill drafted. We get some other legislators. We bring it to the committee. Well, these gentlemen come from the credit unions. They've got another idea to actually make more of this than the original idea. So I think it's up to the committee now, Industry, Business, and Labor Committee, to take these ideas, and I hope these gentlemen coming from the credit union show up tomorrow with a set of amendments and say, we hear you legislators, but let's do a better job. They've got a set of amendments, change this, and make it more workable.
What sort of changes do you think should be made?
Well, just these ideas of maybe using some resources to back up the credit union loans so they can take risks. There's New Americans all over the state. There are people that are not New Americans that need some credit. One of the things that's going on here is these are different kind of products too. It might be somebody developing an ethnic food business. It might be an artist. It might be a carver. It might be a person who does crafts. And they really are not going to have any collateral at all other than maybe their name. And so an amendment I would suggest that the credit unions could bring is let's permit government to back up these loans, maybe through the Bank of North Dakota or whatever, so that it takes away the risk. And that way more of these loans could get out to more citizens around the state. But it really starts out with Fauzia Adi's idea from the Immigration Center in Fargo.
What sort of potential do you think that there is for job creation or economic activity from this idea for either loans or guarantees of loans, small loans?
You know, my work with New Americans is such that many of these people are actually well educated, had some sort of business in the country they came from, and they leave that country because of some extreme issues of war, genocide, civil actions. And so they have the skills and the ability, and they really want to make it in America. They've dreamt about America. They've been in a refugee camp for years, thinking that's the promised land. Well, they get here, and they're motivated. So I think there's great potential here, and I think, too, our state, dramatic growth in population brings in people from around the country, and people from around the country want diversity. They aren't satisfied with sauerkraut, sausage, and the Norwegian food. What?
Lutefisk.
Lutefisk.
Nobody's satisfied with that.
I don't think the Norwegians themselves are satisfied with lutefisk.
They want things from around the world. And here we got these new Americans. They can provide that diversity. So I think there's a lot of potential. And, you know, Lutheran Social Services and other social service agency help bring these people to this state, essentially because our State Department of federal government says these people are endangered. We give them a place here to live, to start out, and this is the perfect way for these people to return back to the community.
I mean, as a senator from Fargo, who is, I mean, a lot of the new Americans that we've been referring to come to Fargo. And could you just explain, you know, where are these folks from? Do you know why they come to Fargo? And how many folks are we talking about?
Well, it's interesting, Dale. In one of our elementary schools, there are 44 different languages spoken. And these people come from various countries in Africa, India, and some of the outer region, Eastern European countries, South American countries. So they come from all over the place. I don't know, we have thousands of new Americans in Fargo. We have many in Bismarck, many in Minot, many in Grand Forks. And they're starting to move out from these larger cities. Essentially, they're in Fargo because Fargo needs these people and their labor. You know, it's interesting, 20 years ago, there's all kinds of complaints about Lutheran Social Services bringing in these people, thinking they were a drain on society or a cost. Well, here we find out that they actually pay their bills. They actually are very much needed. In fact, if it wasn't for new Americans, there wouldn't be new employees in Fargo for a lot of our developing businesses. We have lots of new businesses that hire all new Americans, and if it weren't for new Americans, those businesses would have to shut down.
Mr. Olson, what do you think about what Senator Mathern mentioned about possible improvements that could be made to this bill in terms of perhaps supplying money for loan guarantees or other forms of aid for new Americans to make microloans to them?
Well, I think the right vehicle would be the Bank of North Dakota. If we're going to make a $200,000 investment, you know, the Department of Commerce was at the testimony today, and they did say that, yeah, we don't do this currently, but we'll find a program. We know that other states are doing this, so we can make it work. But I think if the state is willing to make that investment and guarantee these loans, and we could run it through the Bank of North Dakota, and they could work in tandem with credit unions and with community banks to offer these loans, because I think that we all would if they were guaranteed. And there are things that have to come along with this, too, and that's financial education. We talked about financial literacy on the show before. And a lot of these microloans require that kind of financial education, and along with it, business education, marketing and customer service, and all kinds of workshops that help them succeed in their business. So that all comes with it.
There is a gentleman who won a Nobel Peace Prize because he was in the micro lending business, and it was something that he promoted. It was something that he was an evangelist for, if I may use the term. And because of his work, there are a lot of folks around the world who have jobs, who have started businesses for a very small initial investment. Mr. Olson, I believe you're familiar with this.
Yeah, his name
work.
is Muhammad Yunus. I believe that's how you pronounce it. It's Y-U-N-U-S. And he was awarded the Nobel Prize for his work and his diligence in his groundbreaking work in microlending globally.
Mr. Thompson, do the issues presented by microlending, are they particularly complex for a bank or a credit union?
Well, I don't think so because of the size necessarily, but it might be, Senator Mathern mentioned a carver or a sculptor or something like that. That's not generally the kind of business that we give a loan to, or maybe if it's an ethnic food store that we don't quite understand, that we haven't given a loan on that type of business. That I could see could increase the complexity of it, because if we don't have that understanding. But otherwise, in terms of writing a business loan, I mean, you're looking at the same elements that, we are going to have, and that is the component of education. There would need to be some kind of business plan. There's got to be some kind of documentation that's going to explain what the idea is, how it's going to work. And if that's the case, that looks solid. We know how to make loans, and we're really good at it. We've been given small dollar loans for many, many years. We'll continue to do so. So I don't think it's going to be overly complex, and it is something that, as long as we had some backing, I think we'd be really open to looking at.
Senator Mathern, the Immigrant Development Center, is this something that they do for folks that need a microloan or have an idea for a business? Do they help to kind of guide them through the bureaucracy of it?
The Immigrant Development Center does that. They also help in the education for employers on how to work with new Americans, and they help new Americans figure out what are the rules of commerce and work ethic in America. So they do that. But beyond that, the Immigrant Development Center is a place. It's a building. The goal is to have a center of many small businesses. So they will have a building. In fact, they have the building already, and then they want to rent out rooms in the building for these small businesses. And these small businesses need the microloan to begin their process of filling their inventory, for example. And so the Immigrant Developmental Center is a place that not only helps people, but is a place where the business can locate. And then the citizens that are interested in this kind of product can go one place and might experience Asian activities, African activities, South American activities, all in one area.
Is this fairly similar to, we hear talk, we have heard talk in the legislature and in the economic development community about business incubators and places of that nature. Isn't this fairly similar to this?
Yeah. Excellent word. That's basically what it is, Dale. It's an incubator for these people who have these ideas, have the drive, and they need a little bit of assistance to make it work.
And I think that we'd like to really help. That there's 68 million under or non-banked people in the United States today, and we don't want to see these people as well fall into a group that is underbanked or unbanked and have to go to high interest rate payday lenders. So we certainly like to try to help them understand the banking system in the United States and understand credit unions and what our philosophy is and what we do.
The gentleman you just heard speaking was Mr. Robbie Thompson. He's the president and CEO of the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas. We've also had with us this evening discussing a micro-lending program that's the subject of a bill that's introduced in the North Dakota Senate. We've also had Senator Tim Mathern. He's a Democrat from Fargo who has worked extensively with new Americans in Fargo and is familiar with their issues. We also have Mr. Jeff Olson, who is a vice president for advocacy for the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas. And we thank the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas for sponsoring an hour of this program. They are a principal sponsor of the legislature today, and they help present a program one night a week. And they are having their legislative social later on this week, and we certainly wish you gentlemen success in that endeavor.
Thank you.
This is Dale Wetzel with the Legislature today. Thank you.